What took place on the night of the 31st of October was so crucial to create an environment where genocide can take place. The majority of Hindus looked away. So when the attacks started happening, they just watched. A minority took part. There was also a small minority who actually helped Sikhs. That's really important to say. If you go back to the 1st of November, the Home Secretary announced that to the media, 10 people had died. We know that 400 Sikhs were killed in Trunakpuri on that day. On the 2nd of November, they admitted to about 20 or 30 dead. By that time, there were thousands dead. That's the extent in which they wanted to hide the crime. Indira Gandhi's bodyguards had family in Punjab, and they visited Punjab after the attack on the Golden Temple, and they found out the truth about what took place, the innocents that were killed, the attack on the Akal Takht. They saw the damage that was done by their boss. That incensed them to take revenge.
What's up, people? Welcome to this week's episode of the Indy and Doctor podcast. We are joined by a very special guest. His name is Pav Singh. He is a member of the National Union of Journalists. He has been instrumental in campaigning for the issues surrounding the 1984 massacres. In 2004, he spent a year in India researching the full extent of the pogroms and the subsequent cover-up. And he's also the author, as you can probably see in the shot, of 1984 India's Guilty Secret, and editor and publisher of the 1984 Sikh Archive. That will be live now as a website for everyone to view. Check the notes in the description. That will all be there. But first, I just want to say a big thank you for Pav for joining us. Pav, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So, Pav, this is obviously a very complex, deep topic. And I think it would be good for the listeners because a lot of people might have a really good knowledge of this or barely any working knowledge. Could you just paint the scene for us of what exactly happened, obviously in 1984 and then leading up to the actual period that you know very well, that is the lesser known period out of the events in 1984, if that makes sense? A very loaded question, but please go ahead.
Sure. So 40 years ago, on the 31st of October, the then Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her two Sikh bodyguards. Now, they just happened to be Sikh. They took revenge for the attack on the Golden Temple, which took place 6 months prior. So that's how things sparked off in the early morning of the 31st of October. She was rushed to hospital, and within a few hours, she was pronounced dead. Now, on that day, there was very little violence. Even in the evening, there was one or two reported deaths. A few Sikhs were ruffled, taken off buses and attacked. But there weren't any major massacres or wholesale attacks that took place. So what needed to happen is a series of events that we now know is on record. We've had court cases, we've had witness testimonies and sworn affidavits through the two official inquiries. We can now paint a more clearer picture of what exactly took place. So at the hospital where Mrs. Gandhi was fighting for her life, the leading Congress leaders at the time, particularly in Delhi, met. And according to the then President Zail Singh, who was a Sikh himself, his secretary testified a few years later that this group of Congress leaders discussed what would take place in terms of revenge on the Sikh community. And they would use the slogan, Khoon Dad Badla Khoon, which is blood for blood. And that's really set the scene for the next 4 days and what was going to happen in the next 4 days. Essentially, it was a program of collective punishment on the whole Sikh community in northern India for the act of two Sikhs in killing Mrs. Gandhi. A population of 13 million Sikhs were held to ransom and blamed for that act. No distinction between men, women, or children. No distinction between politics, There could have been Agalis, there could have been even Congress members were attacked. So that's really where it happened. The other thing that happened was the control of the narrative. So this event was originally called the Anti-Sikh Riots, and that narrative persists to this day. The media continues to regard it as a riot. And essentially that set the tone. It was a way to actually cover up the crimes and to shield the guilty. By saying riot, you are talking about a disorganized violence, whereas in truth, it was organized, it was systematic, and it was targeted on one particular community. 14 years on, we have moved on, and many now characterize it as a crime against humanity and a genocide. And even the Delhi court has recognized it as a crime against humanity and genocide. But the Indian government has yet to formally recognize it, and the international community hasn't recognized it at all in those terms. They still see it as a riot, a spontaneous reaction to Mrs. Gandhi's assassination. So there's an element of blame here. They had it coming. They needed to be taught a lesson. And that was the main narrative that actually got lots of ordinary Hindus blaming all Sikhs during those days. And it was very easy to, from words and what they heard throughout the year, that Sikhs were traitors, that they were against India as a state, to then develop into wholesale attacks on the Sikh community.
Okay, so this obviously happened Indira Gandhi was assassinated on the 31st of October. Could you just give people a bit of context as to why she was assassinated and what that was done for? There was a massive event that happened before that. Could you just give viewers a bit of a insight on that, just to paint the full picture?
I mean, I can give you a bit of a genesis to 1984, even before the attack on the Harmandir Sahib, the Golden Temple, in June 1984. So in the early 80s, the main Sikh party, the Akali Dal, put together a set of demands called the Anandpur Sahib Resolution, which called for more rights for Punjab, having its own capital, rights over its rivers. At that time, the rivers were going to be diverted to the other states, to the detriment of farmers. The majority of farmers in Punjab were Sikh. There was also religious demands, so saying that actually Sikhs are a unique, identifiable religious group, whereas according to the Indian constitution, they're actually part of the Hindu religion. So it's explicitly said in the constitution that Sikhs are part of Hinduism. And just going back to partition, 1947, and even before that, Sikhs were promised by the Congress Party, the likes of Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru, that they will enjoy a glow of freedom in their own state, in the Punjab, if they opted to join India. Now, there were few minority calls for a separation, a separate Sikh state, but it wasn't really taken seriously, even by our Sikh leaders. It was just a way to attack Pakistan. They trusted Congress. The Sikh leaders at the time put their lot in with the new Indian state, but very much, in a matter of a few years, they were betrayed. The Constitution, didn't recognize them. There was a whole fight for a couple of decades to make Punjab a Punjabi-speaking state. Most of the states in India had their own language, but Punjab was the only one where they had to fight for that right to have a distinct Punjabi language. But as a consequence of that, they lost territory. So from a larger Punjab, just after partition, where they lost half of the Punjab to Pakistan, they then saw Punjab divided again to three parts, which created Punjab, Haryana, and Himachal Pradesh. So again, it was split according to Punjabi, but also there were parts that shouldn't have gone to Haryana in particular, and they lost territory in that. So there was always a grievance there that they were betrayed. They haven't been given rights in terms of farmers' rights, religious rights, and that all boiled over in the early 80s when the Akali Dal started to struggle, a civil rights, civil obedience struggle against the Indian government at the time, which was headed by Indira Gandhi. The other thing that was happening is that was the Indian Congress Party at that time were also playing with fire. So they were at times, particularly coming to 1984, realizing that they weren't going to get voted back in. So they decided to use the communal card. So in the UK, it's a racist card. So playing one religious group against another, encouraging extremism on both sides. So initially patronizing extremists in the Sikh community, and then supporting extremists in the Hindu right, Hindutva side of things. And that was always going to blow up to the detriment of both Hindu and Sikh Punjabis. And there was various other, there was a lot of violence that was happening in the Punjab. Particularly there was sectarian killings. So particularly Hindus were taken off buses and shot, either by Sikh militants or by police vigilantes. There's been lots of evidence decades after, from intelligence people and police, saying that there were actually police vigilantes who were involved in those. But again, there were also Sikh militants who were also attacking Hindus. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to call out when we talk about 1984 and the genocide, the government-sponsored genocide against the Sikhs. Prior to 1984 and also after, there were attacks on Hindus and also Sikhs who didn't agree with, the notion of Khalistan, who were also attacked. So I think it's time now that we, as a community, actually called out those attacks, against attacks on any innocent people, which is contrary to the Sikh faith, and also even atrocities like the Air India bombing a year later in 1985. With the deaths of more than 300 innocent people of all faiths who were killed, and many, many children. And a couple of Sikhs were convicted from one of the extremist groups in Canada. And I think, one of the things when I looked into the case of the Air India, one of the family members who'd lost someone in the bombing, she said, our deaths, your deaths, this dichotomy does not make sense. All innocent Sikhs, all innocent killings should be condemned by both sides. And I think that's a really important thing to take away from what I'm trying to do 40 years on, is to look at this holistically and look at all the atrocities that were taking place and condemn them both. And that's one way to bring communities together and actually start the process of reconciliation.
Of course. Now, with that, sticking on the point of why the bodyguards actually did that action on Indira Gandhi, what did she do that made them have the impetus to go and do that? Could you just give a bit of insight on that, and then we'll dive into further details?
Yeah. So to the run-up to the June attack on the Golden Temple, there were various Sikh groups, militant groups, who had occupied the Golden Temple. It wasn't just one group. So you've got the group, the Taksal group, headed by Sant Bindrawali. You also had another group, the Baba Khalsas, who also were in the Golden Temple. You also had the Akali Dal. Not a lot of people know this, but all three pretty much didn't go on at all. All three of them. There was never a united front. So the Akali Dal took a more moderate view and negotiated with the government, whereas the other two groups who didn't really get on with each other fought more in a militant way to do things. But I think if you look at Sant Bindrawali, you have a figure who's very, I mean, he's very controversial. My view is, like any historical figure, there's always grey areas. It's not black and white. I mean, some people think he's a hero. Some people think he's a terrorist. I've always looked at it as, the grey. Our historical figures of the past are all grey areas. Look at Churchill. He did an amazing job in the Second World War fighting the Nazis, but he also had some very unpalatable views in terms of race as well. So, you really need to take a nuanced view of these actors. And although he, did amazing work bringing people back to Sikhism, stopping people taking drugs and alcohol, and at cases actually supported local Hindus, there were a few cases where his rhetoric bordered on communalism. Having read most of his speeches, there were some communal overtones, which are obviously the state took advantage of and then completely painted him as a communal figure. Whereas in the past, they actually allowed him, supported him, arrested him, and then let him go. I mean, there's all sorts of, there were never any FRIs against him. So in a way, they were, I think, creating a straw man in Sant Bindrawali as an excuse to attack the Sikh community on whole. So cornering groups around Bindrawali in the Golden Temple as an excuse to attack Sikhs, to other them, so that then Indira Gandhi can say to the majority Hindu population, look, these Sikhs, and there's a blurring of who Bindrawali supporters were, who were Sikhs and Akalis, they're all the same, according to Congress and also the media, peddled this lie that all these Sikhs were extremists and gurdwaras, not patriotic and traitors to the nation, in order for Indira Gandhi to go for the bloc Hindu vote, and that was the strategy. I mean, my view is actually I don't think she was anti-Sikh in the sense that she did promote the first Sikh president, Zail Singh, to high office, and she also insisted that her bodyguards remained who were Sikh, even though the intelligence community said no, maybe they should be taken out in this volatile situation. She brought them back. But what she did, and I think she was given bad advice, first by people around her, that you should, take the communal view of attacking Sikhs and also attacking minority Muslims. I mean, there was pogroms against Muslims in Mumbai, which was then called Bombay, early in a few months before June 1984. And she actually shared the platform with one of the extremist Hindutva people in Mumbai. And she came up with the slogan, the majority also have rights. So she clearly was taking that line. And it was in that situation with the advice from the army, I think the army said to her, look, we can take these on very quickly, only take a few hours. We'll just take the troops and take him out. But lo and behold, it ended up 3 or 4 days of fighting. And, the guys in there fought like lions. They fought with whatever weapons they had. And I think there was a realization that if they surrendered, they would be killed. The army said that they announced the pilgrims. And the other thing, it was done on June the 4th, which was on the martyrdom of Guru Arjan Dev, where the Golden Temple's full of pilgrims, innocent people, men, women, and children. The army said they asked people to come out, but the evidence is that no one heard those calls for the innocents to come out. And then the army went in, the tanks went in, and they went, the cavalry went as if it was a complete war against another nation, but it was a war against their own people. And the evidence we have from journalists and also from the doctors who took the postmortems is that many of the people, the pilgrims, were killed at short range, point blank, with hands tied behind their backs with their turbans. And you're literally talking about thousands of people who were killed in those days after the army took control. Even after they took control, even the Sikh library was burnt after the army took control, and many of the manuscripts and handwritten hukumnamas of the gurus were lost. A lot of the treasures were taken by the army. Many atrocities took place. Children were taken away and put in camps for months on end. And human rights groups were never allowed in the Punjab. In fact, there was a complete blackout of the media and on the human rights groups. So there wasn't any news coming out. Complete censorship. And the Akal Takht was damaged completely. It had to be rebuilt. And that's where Sam Bindra was eventually killed. So yeah, he fought like a tiger. He fought, and that's why he's now a martyr in many Sikhs' minds. That if when the Golden Temple was attacked, he and his group was there to make a stand. And I think that's why he's so popular, not just in the diaspora, but also in Punjab. So yeah, it was a real mess. Obviously, in that situation, Indira Gandhi's bodyguards, the two of them, Beant Singh and Satwant Singh, had family in Punjab, and they visited the Punjab after the attack on the Golden Temple, and they found out the truth about what took place, the innocents that were killed, the attack on the Akal Takht, and they saw the damage that was done by their boss, and I think that incensed them to take revenge.
Yeah. One other question, just to fill in the gap here, Bab. So June has happened, the attack on Harmandir Sahib. World was in shock. And like you said, even though there was the media coverage and there was a blackout and censorship, but obviously word did get out. Between the June and the October, though, what was the kind of, what was the mood and the temperature in Punjab of India, kind of so pre the assassination, but after kind of, the army had essentially cleared out Harmandir Sahib? What was the kind of lay of the land at that point?
So basically, Punjab became a police state after the army took control of the Harmandir Sahib. They also took control, and also a lot of people don't know there were 40 other gurdwaras who were attacked. Many of the gurdwaras, there weren't militants there, so it was clearly an attack on the Sikh faith, their buildings, their gurdwaras, which is the center of Sikhism. So the army completely took over. The police were in control, and there were many human rights abuses that were taking place. And one of the interesting things that is on public record is that the army issued a infamous proclamation to their soldiers, and it's called the Bath Cheat Proclamation, which was a bulletin. And in that, they explicitly targeted baptized Sikhs as terrorists. And that's on record.
When was this?
This was in July 1984. Post 1984, that they released this to the soldiers on the ground, saying, we need to we need to target Ambadari Sikhs. And that's a call for genocide straight away.
Very targeted, very specific.
Very targeted, very specific. And thousands of Sikhs between the age of 14 to 25 were interned. Many didn't return. So that was really the second attack. I think it's called Operation Woodrose, where they went into Sikh villages and took that age group and put them into camps, tortured them. There was many of them were killed in what's called false encounters, which was essentially staged judicial executions. So that incensed the community even further. So that was the second attack.
So it's building. So it's not as if, because you're right, a lot of people, we have a lot of discussion and talks and lectures about the actual attacks themselves, and then there's October, but there are obviously months in between. And like you said, it's not like everything went back to normal, and there was this kind of building. From my point of view, when I think about this now, having got older, the first thing you mentioned there about the June 4th, I mean, that if you've got that many advisors, and we had the British government also who were advising on how to storm Harmandir Sahib as well, and there's planning going on to it, somebody knew that was a very, very specific date. That's number one. Number two, to have the, let's call it the arrogance to actually attack Harmandir Sahib in the same way you attack the Vatican or Makkah or any kind of centers of faith, to think you're able to do that and there's not going to be some sort of correction, retribution, karma, whatever you want to call it. That surprises me. And then, yes, like you said, to keep Sikh bodyguards as your closest bodyguards, thinking that maybe they're going to be loyal to you over their faith. Now, that being said, it still did take tremendous amount of courage and bravery to do that. Because my understanding is after they let off the barrage of bullets, they didn't run and they surrendered themselves straight away. They accepted. They were either, actually, I don't know what happened at that point. Were they taken away and then tried and then executed, or were they martyred on the scene? That part I actually don't know. But my understanding is they didn't try and sort of evade justice at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's obviously people who died on the spot. They were martyred in the Golden Temple. Many were after the Golden Temple was controlled. Many of the pilgrims obviously were taken in and put into camps. And even their families, even the villages were taken and put into camps. And then,
sorry, Pav, I think Doctor is referring to the bodyguards.
By Beant Singh, yeah. After they had carried out she'd been assassinated, my understanding is they didn't then try and evade or anything.
Try to flee or anything.
No, they didn't. They put their arms down. They said, I think Beant Singh was the first to say, I've done what I had to do whatever you want. And he was taken and then killed. But Satwant Singh was also attacked, but he survived, ended up in hospital, and then he was eventually tried. But yeah, absolutely, they didn't run away. They knew exactly what they did. It was an act of revenge against what took place, which they saw as an attack on their faith, and also by attack on innocence as well. So I also believe, I think Indira Gandhi herself, I think, realized what she'd done afterwards, and she knew that there would
gravity.
Yeah, yeah. She knew what was going to happen. She was told well before that, don't do this. This could be a big mistake. But the army just sort of misled her and people around her, particularly her son, Rajiv Gandhi, and also her nephew, Arun Nehru, were the ones who were really egging on her to attack Sikhs, and also to other Sikhs. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is after the attack, the Ministry of Broadcasting, which was then headed by an MP called HKL Bhagat, and I'll talk a bit more about Bhagat later. HKL Bhagat controlled the media. He was the propaganda chief. And he constructed one of the Congress MPs, and this is, again, testimony, which is sworn testimony in the Nanavati Commission, which is on the website. And he was responsible for projecting Sikhs as terrorists. So what they did is put together a series of documentaries painting Sikhs as, supported by Pakistan, bringing in foreign weapons, being involved in prostitution, in the Golden Temple, all that stuff.
Wow.
And those tapes were then distributed to the media in India and also in the West. So in 1984, I was a teenager in 1984, but I used to work for a video shop. Now, in those days, we used to have videos and VCRs, we used to call them.
VHS.
So I came across one of these videos. This was being distributed amongst Sikhs and Hindu communities. And I saw one of these, and it was complete propaganda from the Indian government side.
What language is it in?
So it's a mixture of English and Punjabi. And
so they went to the effort to put it in Punjabi as well.
Yeah. And they filmed the soldiers at the Golden Temple saying, look, this is what we found, these weapons, markings of Pakistani markings, Chinese markings. They showed
footage in Harmandir Sahib, post 84.
Yeah.
Whoa, and this is widely distributed.
Yeah, widely distributed. So it was painted.
They went through the effort of doing that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was painted.
That is
so preordained.
Yeah.
Very reminiscent. Now, you're speaking about it, you've alluded to this on your website, but, when you said propaganda, I thought Hermann Goebbels, Hitler's Nazi regime, pushing out, like the Jewish people and their paintings of the big knuck and this, and they're evil and they're going to steal. I mean, that narrative is still pushed now by Jewish people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same thing.
But wow,
and it's all about controlling narrative. So it was adamant that the press wasn't there when the attack took place in June. They didn't want the press, so they kicked the press out, the international press. And there was only one journalist, Indian journalist, Brahma Chalani, who went into the Golden Temple after, and he's the one who then reported on the executions. And his report was published in The Guardian in the UK. Human rights groups came afterwards and did a great report, Oppression in Punjab. Their report was banned straight away. The head of it was Citizens of Democracy, both Hindus and Sikh human rights group, and they were accused of sedition. So there was a clear, program to, keep the truth away from the general public in India and also the international community. And that's why there was never an outcry, both in June and also in November.
Pat, could you give me a bit of an insight as to what's the difference between a riot, a pogrom, and a genocide? And when did the 1984 attacks actually become officially defined as a genocide?
Yeah, so I mean, a riot is disorganized. So it's a disorganized episode of violence. It could be just a mob violence.
Random.
It's very random. There's no political party behind it. It's so for the Indian government, basically they said, look, Indira Gandhi was assassinated, and then people just randomly were so angry they took things in their own hands and attacked Sikhs. So there was no organization behind them, and so forth, which is very puzzling because the evidence shows that actually, where did the weapons come from? Where did the kerosene,
kerosene,
the chemical phosphorus, which was used to burn Sikhs, where did the lists of Sikhs come from? There's a whole list of logistics, the transportation of the mobs into Sikh neighborhoods. All those things needed organization. And we now know that those lists were created a few months before. We have a former bureaucrat in the government who a few years ago admitted to a journalist that those lists of Sikh businesses, homes and businesses, were collected just after the Golden Temple was attacked, on the orders of Arun Nehru MP, the cousin of Rajiv Gandhi. So those lists were then distributed to the death squads in November. So we know there was organization behind it. Pogrom is more a small level of a genocide, so it's slight. There's a bit of organization. So, for example, in 1938, there was pogroms against Jews in Nazi Germany, and then the Nazi Party were involved in whipping up hatred against Jews. There were, about a few hundred who were killed on that night in 1938, the so-called Kristallnacht, the November.
Night of Long Knives.
The November pogroms. Again, another November. And also, again, as a reaction to an assassination. So a Jew assassinated a Nazi official in Paris. The Nazi Party then blamed the Jews, and then there were attacks. So there were a few hundred who were killed, but the majority were taken into camps. And then that really started the Holocaust. From then onwards, the actions against the Jews became stricter and stricter, and eventually we ended up in the death camps. So that's a small sort of organized attack, whereas genocide needs intent. It's really important. There has to be intention to kill in whole or in part a community, an identifiable community, to also damage the survivors, particularly young girls and women, through sexual violence and rape as well. So that's also an element of genocide. And that, I think we can prove now that that's exactly what took place in November. Rape and incineration. That was incineration, death by incineration, is the modus operandi that we saw in those 4 days after Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated.
Right. Okay. So from here in, then I think it's only right that it's referred to as a genocide, not anti-Sikh riots. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a small-scale genocide, absolutely. Some people call it genocidal massacres, which is fine. You can still call it pogroms and a crime against humanity, but absolutely not a riot. There's no way that was a riot, but it hasn't been recognised by the Indian government, and it's not recognised internationally. It's still seen in terms of a communal riot, and that's the problem.
Could I ask why India will not recognise it as a genocide? Is that because if they do that, there's other consequences that follow?
Yeah. So if they're culpable, then they would have to compensate the survivors properly, which they haven't done for 40 years. They would have to house them. They would have to give them proper jobs. And they will also have to open their books particularly in terms of their intelligence papers, because there's a lot we don't know in terms of the logistics. Who supplied the weapons, who supplied the chemicals, the kerosene, where's the chain of command? All those things the intelligence community know, and that's all been hidden. If they recognize it as a genocide, they have to, create a mechanism to allow papers to be released, and then, actually start prosecuting people in the bureaucracy, in the police, senior police, and also in the senior Congress party as well. I mean, this goes higher. I mean, it actually goes to the Gandhi family. If you think about the new Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, he was sworn in on the 31st of October. From Rajiv Gandhi down to, Arun Nehru, controlled the police at the time, told the Sikh police go home, and then allowed the rest of the police force to help the mobs carry out that genocide. Many senior policemen were never convicted, and they were involved. Many Congress MPs, cabinet ministers, and the lower down councillors were also are also involved.
So, when you say Indian government hasn't accepted it, so for that to happen in an official status, would it be the PM of the day? Obviously, it's Modi at the moment, but that level of person would have to come out and, number one, make a statement. The second thing I wanted to ask you upon is, say that day were to come and the books were to open, do the books then open only internally, or would then external kind of objective bodies would be allowed to examine the evidence? So who would be allowed to do the kind of, that kind of forensic level analysis? And then are you envisaging sort of like with the Nuremberg trials, kind of international courts of law, which would be trying people? Is that the kind of thing we'd see?
So we can look at other countries where this has happened. So you can look at South Africa after apartheid, where we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where the South African government, and again, yes, you're right, it has to be the government of the day and the Prime Minister put their hands up and say, look, the state committed this crime. Okay? And South Africa did that with obviously Mandela at the head of the government. He also invited those who committed crimes to come and give testimony. And that's what we need to do in India. And I think, and also looking at other countries, Bosnia and Argentina, same thing happened. There has to be a willingness on the government to actually admit that this took place and also recognize the enormity of what took place. The official inquiries did not cover all the deaths. The deaths were never counted properly. Officially, the government admits to nearly 3,000 dead in Delhi, but that took 3 or 4 years for them to admit that. But we know that a lot of other areas in northern India weren't covered by the inquiries. The dead weren't counted in the villages and towns of northern India, from Haryana to the outskirts of Delhi to Kanpur, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Kashmir, you name it, the whole of northern India where Congress party was in control. They were attacks on Sikhs. There were attacks on Sikhs on buses and trains as well. There were villages, for example, in Haryana, there's a famous village called Hund Chilla. Hund Chilla, we only found out a few years ago there was a massacre there in 1984.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about that particular story? Because that really struck me.
Yeah, so there was an engineer who visited this village quite near Gurgaon in Haryana back in, I think, 2011. And he stumbled across remnants of a burnt-out gurdwara, a burnt-out homes. And he started asking questions, what happened here? And some of the people around said, actually, this is the former village of the Sardars. Former. So where did they go? And then it transpired with some of the survivors that on the 1st of November, the Sikh community in Hunchila was almost wiped out. They took refuge in the Gurdwara. The Gurdwara was attacked and burnt, and they died in there. They were attacked in the homes, individual homes as well. And that only came out a few years ago. And you just imagine there's a lot of villages we don't even know about. That people, if you wipe out a whole family, there's no one to testify in an official inquiry, is there? There's no one to ask for compensation. They've gone. Just so looking at the numbers, the government only admitted. And funny enough, if you go back to the 1st of November, the Home Secretary officially announced that to the media on the 1st of November, 10 people had died. On the 1st of November, we know that 400 Sikhs were killed in Trinakpuri on that day. On the 2nd of November, they admitted to about 20 or 30 dead. By that time, there were thousands dead. That's the extent in which they wanted to hide the crime. We also know from a lot of testimonies after people were killed that there were groups of people going around collecting the bodies, putting them in trucks and taking them to the outskirts of Delhi to perform mass cremations. We know from the police officers who were caught in a sting operation about 10 years ago, admitting that they were told to let the killings go on for 4 days and then get rid of the crime, get rid of the bodies. So there's an element of hiding the true death toll. And it took probably 30 years before The Economist published the figure of 8,000 dead, half in Delhi. And I think that's at least the death toll. I think we can probably agree that that's the starting point. 8,000 dead.
At least
in 4 days.
Which, like you said,
going back to the actual person who made that discovery, what then came as a result of that afterwards? Could you tell us about the events that came after?
Yeah, absolutely. So he went to the media. Some of the media reported it. His company found out what he was doing and lost his job.
Wow.
And again, cover up. They didn't want this to get out. And there's also a history of censorship here. You know, when the genocide took place, some of the human rights groups did a fantastic job helping the victims, recording their testimony. A famous publication, Who Are the Guilty, by the People's Union of Democratic Rights and Union of Civil Liberties, brought out this report, was banned. In Punjab, I think it's banned, still banned. And that listed the perpetrators of who was behind the attacks. There was a famous picture of a burning corpse on one of the newsstands. The government banned that. The government banned some of the international footage as well. A few years later, there was a famous film called Amu by an American director. And
so I watched that film when I was a kid.
Now, there were scenes in there that was cut. There was a famous scene of the widows calling out politicians and the police, right? Behind the genocide. They had to cut that. Actually, they didn't cut it out. They cut the voice. So it was silent. There was many other cuts. And also, in 1987, one of the few authors from the UK to go into Delhi to find out the truth is our very own Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie was one of the first to go to Delhi, talk to the widows, and created a documentary called The Riddle of Midnight. Now, The Riddle of Midnight took the testimony of Sikh widows and took the testimony of exactly what took place and the culpability of the government at the time in its hand in the genocide and the police. The Indian High Commission in London tried to ban that documentary, The Riddle of Midnight. It was unsuccessful, and it ended up, the Channel 4 put it out and broadcast it, thank God. And even after that event, and I talk about this in my book and also on the archive, Salman Rushdie was astonished the extent to which the Indian government wanted to suppress not just the testimony of widows, not terrorists, but widows. They were so scared of the voice of widows that they tried to ban that testimony. And Rushdie couldn't record those widows. So when he came back, he edited it in a way that he got the voice, but he just had imagery of the widows. And I think that's probably more powerful than if we had just the real, real footage. It just shows, and it just goes on and on. Books have been banned over the years. And there's that kind of sense that they just don't want to face the truth. and they don't want this to come out. And that's the reason why there hasn't been an international outcry.
I remember. Sorry, Pav. I remember Anu very well and very clearly because that was, I think, the first depiction DVD that was shown to me at home by my family. I don't know if my dad intended to put it on, but I was watching it and I was quite young. I was about 13, 14. And I knew what happened in 84, but I'd never seen it be depicted in a setting on TV that was actually done in a formal film documentary basis. And that really struck me. And it stuck with me to this day. I remember so many parts of it. I only watched it once. I can't bring myself to watch it again. But it was heartbreaking. And if that was the cut down version, I can only imagine how, not vicious, but how clear it was depicting the full extent of the massacre, that it had to be cut down, or it was insisted to be cut down at the lack of the own director's will to cut it. So it was just forcibly done without him even willing to sort of have that put upon him. Yeah.
I remember. When was the last time you guys were in Harmandir Sahib?
2017.
2017. Pav, yourself?
4 or 5 years ago.
4 or 5 years ago. So I remember when I was, obviously been a few times, when I was young, but kind of an age where you kind of getting to understand what had happened. And I remember going obviously down the steps as you're entering Harmandir Sahib. And I was with one of our drivers, and Minda Singh ji, and he said to me, he was like, the tank was here. And when you're actually standing there, and then you take that in and you actually think about the size of a tank, to come into what is a peaceful place and to think this actually happened. Because a lot of the time when you're aware of something that happened, much in the same way in secondary school, you learn about Nazi Germany, it's in every GCSE paper, and you know all this stuff. But then in the same way, I went to Sachsenhausen, which was one of the extermination camps. And we happened to go, I think it was February half term, so it was cold. But the day we went there, it was cold, wet, sleet, snow. And the guy who was giving us a tour said, you guys have got all these kapre on. You're trying to be warm and you're still cold. Imagine being here when they had the striped pajamas and things, and they had no food, and they had no pani, and they were all hectic and lost weight. You imagine that? And it's these things which make you really think about the horror of what it must have been to be there. The other question
I remember in 2017.
Go on, Indy.
Sorry, Gordon. When I was standing there, at this point, I knew more than enough to sort of have a picture. And when you stand there and look around and you think, okay, there was a tank, maybe there, one maybe there, one maybe there, Harmandir Sahib's there, and it dawns on you when you start depicting it in your head of what it actually could have looked like. And it just blows your mind thinking this is so wrong, and you're in such a peaceful place for this to even have occurred or crossed someone's mind. It's quite heinous.
Yeah. And also there was no attempts to negotiate. So if you want you want to arrest someone, you could have done millions of other things. You could have brought the media and asked people to come out and arrest someone. You could have handled it much better than actually sending an army in with tanks.
0 to 100.
It was, and I think one British intelligence officer actually said to crack a nut, they used a hammer. That's
that was
a very good analogy.
Yeah, analogy. That was exactly what they did. But it could have been so different. They could have negotiated. There was different ways they could have looked at this rather than just going. And the first shots came from the army. They actually start shooting the bar Sahib first. I mean, you can see, and I think one of the British authors, journalists at the time, Mark Tully, reported on that on the first day that there were bullet marks on the actual Darbar Sahib, which is the actual Golden Temple, and there was actually a bullet that went through the Guru Granth Sahib as well, and one of the priests was killed. So the actual shots were by the army first of all.
And earlier you talked about intent, that very, very clear intent of what was going to happen. Earlier, there was something you alluded to, I just wanted to pick up on, which was, you said a lot hasn't been, and this is that was the other question about, in certain countries, I know obviously we hear a lot about in America and JFK's assassination, the declassification of documents. Is that something that exists in India, declassification?
Not that I know of, no. I mean, they're
fine, okay.
India's very a closed society.
They call it the largest document, the largest democracy in the world, but is it?
No, I think it's quite corrupt. It's very easy to control the media. A lot of money is in media, so it's very partisan. And it's it's two main parties. Both have blood on their hands. They both have their own genocides.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's not a really conducive place where people, a government can own up. And I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime.
That was my next question. Do you think it will happen in your lifetime?
No, absolutely not. I think it's a generational thing. We'll have to wait another generation for the young youth and the more progressive Indians to actually look at this
objectively
objectively. And that's one of the reasons why I want to publish, and I published the 1984 Sikh archives. So I'm essentially opening up a free educational archive to help people, students, to researchers, to look at the evidence. It's evidence led. It's not underplaying, but it's not overplaying. It's not exaggerating. This is the facts. This is the testimonies. This is what people at the time. I mean, one of the issues I came across before I created the archive was a lot of the evidence was being destroyed by the police. Their logbooks were disappearing. A lot of the media at the time, it was very print, wasn't digital. So obviously we've lost that, the original articles. And a lot of, if there were articles, and one of the newspapers, Indian Express, did actually report on the violence, that's behind a paywall now. So there's an issue there, and obviously there's a few books that have been written, but not everyone reads books.
Correct. So ease of access to information.
Yeah, exactly. So what we need is a place where people can actually get this information, rather than going on social media where they get these extremes, and people don't cite proper references or first-hand accounts. They just say something.
Hearsay and inflammatory and
exactly.
In your research, did you find, you mentioned obviously we now know that there are lists and it was very organized and very systematic, as you said in the opening spiel. Did you find, so the supply of arms, for example, we know that the British were involved in the staging, the planning of Harmandir Sahib. Did you find in your evidence, any external governments, any other countries that were involved in that part in the November per se? Was that all kind of in-house? Any evidences?
No. So it was all in-house. No, there's no evidence of any external country that were involved. This was a genocide committed by the Congress Party. Okay. We know who they are. We know from the top all the way down, from the Prime Minister, who was indifferent, looks away, didn't call out the army when he should have done, called out an election to take advantage of the anti-Sikh hate. And then he promoted the killers, promoted the perpetrators to high office. That's his record. And we also know the local leaders. One has been convicted, Sajjan Kumar, a few years ago, but there's many other that have escaped. And then lower down, the local council as well. So it's purely Congress. Now, within that, there may have been other members of the RSS and BJP, but as a party, they were not involved. Okay. And I say that because I have created a case study with the launch of the website, to look at who the killers were. So where did they come from? Were they local or were they from outside? What was their political affiliation? Were they Congress, BJP? On that, there were about 96% Congress and 4% BJP. So it was purely Congress who did this genocide. In terms of who the killers were, for years people said actually it's the state, it's people who were brought in from outside. But that's partly true, but that's not the whole picture. So the evidence is that 50% came from outside, organized by Congress, but 50% were local Hindus, neighbors.
So when you say that, you mean like Armbanda, random person?
Random, no, Armbanda, but not random. They were, the victims named them by name as their neighbors who attacked them.
Okay, so I'll take out the word random. So people they knew.
Yeah.
And if we're looking back at this now, and like I said, this has happened many times in history before and probably will happen in the future again. What were the core principles of the propaganda which meant it was easy enough to rile? So if someone's your neighbor, you've known for a long time, you know what they're like, you know their savant, you know how they are, they're probably neighbors. Some neighbors don't like each other, but say you're the neighbor that you did like. You have a good relationship. You share your food and drink, whatever. What narrative has to be painted, and how could it have been done so strongly to flip that person into a killer?
Yeah,
because I'm thinking about this now. Like, what would it take for us three to go and attack our neighbors, for example? What has your research shown on that? Like, how can they be manipulated so expertly?
So we've already spoken about the build-up to November, the propaganda, the framing of Sikhs as the traitor, the outside, bent on dividing the country. So that was the build-up. But what took place on the 9th to the 31st of October was so crucial to create an environment where genocide can take place. So the police went around sharing a rumor. In fact, there's about 3 rumors that they shared to the public through loudspeakers. The first one was that the Sikhs had poisoned the water. There's no evidence of that. The second one was Sikhs were collecting in gurdwaras with weapons that they were about to attack Hindus. Again, absolutely no evidence. The third one was there were trainfuls of Hindus from Punjab arriving at Delhi train stations. Again, no evidence, but actually in the next few days we would find out actually it was Sikhs who were being killed on trains. So these 3 rumors, and again we've got testimony that was submitted to the official inquiries of people, mostly Hindus, who was, just going out in the streets and hearing these rumors that the police were, saying on the loudspeakers, and that it scared people. You can imagine the Hindu community being told these things, that there was more attacks to happen. They just killed the prime minister. There were more attacks to come. And I think that created an environment fear-mongering where the majority of Hindus looked away. So when the attacks started happening, they just watched. A minority took part, the killers. There was also a small minority who actually helped Sikhs. And I think that's really important to say. So if you look at Trilakpuri, where 500-600 people, Sikhs, were killed, there was another 500 who were protected by Hindus. Muslims protected Sikhs in many areas as well, Christians as well. There's a famous story of Hindu shopkeepers who laid down in front of Sikh shops, telling the mobs, "You kill us first."
Wow. That never gets told.
And also, there's a guy. I mean, I don't think anyone knows this guy. in India or even in the West. His name's Prabhu Dayal.
Prabhu Dayal, okay.
Prabhu Dayal, and it's apt that he's called Prabhu, which obviously means God. He did a very godly act. So he left his home on November the 1st in Baljit Nagar, just outside Delhi. Left his wife and 2 teenage kids. And he worked for a Sikh family, a Sikh factory in Vasant Vihar, which is in Delhi. The mobs arrived and tried to burn down the factory and was successful. There were 3 Sikh ladies who were upstairs. The guards scalped. Prabhu Dayal went up to the first floor and rescued those 3 Sikh ladies, came down, rescued them, but unfortunately died of his injuries. That was a sacrifice he made. And I think that's really important when we talk about 1984. We do also need to talk about those Prabhus, there's a bit of a humanity amidst the barbarity and barbarism from Hindus, Muslims, and Christians, and people of no faith who helped Sikhs, hid them. And also, after the violence has subsided, 4 days later, they helped in the relief camps. They documented the testimonies. The social workers came in to help the widows take their testimonies. So it's real, the citizens came out, the good citizens of India came out to help the Sikhs. And again, that's a narrative you will not hear from officials.
Yeah, and that's very important to paint that it's not that the whole of humanity was absent in the same way you had Schindler and Schindler's List. So there were obviously good people in that time who still did the right thing and were not influenced by these extreme levels of propaganda. Of the 3 rumors you said, the second one you said about they're getting ready to attack in Gurdwara. So we almost need to do a preemptive strike before they strike.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. And obviously
you can see how that's very easy for someone to buy into.
Yeah. And then when the assassination happened, that was kind of a boiling, erupting point, and it's like, okay.
And if you look at the 1st of November, what was attacked first? It was the Gurdwara. So simultaneously, the Gurdwara were attacked, and hundreds of Gurdwara were burnt down in Delhi alone. And people in them, that died. So the first attacks was on the Gurdwara, and then they went to the houses and brought out Sikhs one by one. And the way they did it meticulously, crossing off names of people who were killed. There cases
like it was some kind of register.
Yeah, I heard cases of people, survivors, saying the mobs came back to my house 6 times to cross off my dad's corpse. 6 times. And the police was going around actually reprimanding mobs to say, you guys haven't killed enough, get back and finish the job. Whole-scale neighborhoods were wiped out in outside of Delhi and in other areas. We've got a widows' colony in New Delhi of widows.
Yeah.
Because they came from these other areas and they never went back. They were wiped out. This was whole-scale massacres with intent. Where's that intent come from? The leaders, the Congress leaders, on the 1st of November, in meetings, called for the wiping out of Sikhs. So there's that intent. To their followers, do not leave any Sikh man, woman, or child alive. And the women, there was orchestrated gang rape against the women to damage them and the young girls as well. And many of them committed suicide afterwards in camps. So we talk about the 8,000 figure. There's much more than that. If you look at the intergenerational trauma that's happened in the last 40 years, many of these people, the children who saw these crimes, succumbed to drug abuse in these areas where they live and where they live. The awful places that the government gave them, awful dilapidated housing. That they're still living on. No help, from anyone. And no help even from the major Sikh institutions like the Shromi Akali Dal, Shromi Committee, we all know the Golaks and how rich the Golaks of the Golden Temple is. But there's very much help in terms of those widows today. And I think it's that there's a shame there as well for our community.
As in they've become forgotten. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're only remembered on the anniversary. So you'll notice on the anniversary, these politicians of the Akali Dal will go into the widows' colony and take a few pictures and talk about, and then they'll disappear for a whole year.
You'll even notice this here in the UK, Pav, where each impending government or incoming government will always say, yep, we will set up a full inquiry into the UK involvement, into what happened in 1984.
Yeah.
They always say it, and nothing ever comes of it. It's just become a dog whistle to win votes.
Yeah.
And it's frankly ridiculous. And it's to the point where 40 years on, if people still believe it, then genuinely you need to give your head a wobble.
Yeah.
But that's neither here nor there.
But
one important question I need to...
I just want to say it can be so different. So you know about the massacre in Northern Ireland in 1971 of Catholics, infamously called Bloody Sunday. Okay.
Yeah.
Recently, a few years ago, the government of Britain actually put their hands up and said, we apologise for that attack by our army, British Army, against innocent Catholics in Northern Ireland. So it can be different, when you get the right leadership, amends can be made. It is possible, but I just don't think it's going to happen yet.
So you think it's a war of attrition? We can't forget. We need to make the information more accessible. We need to educate future generations. And like you said, you need the right people with the kind of mind frames and kind of objectivity to then want to do it. That's our best chance of it sort of coming out, would you say?
Absolutely. And we'd also have to say to the survivors, look, we haven't forgot you.
Mm.
We're not going to move on. We're never going to forget 84. We are not going to move on because you haven't moved on.
Yeah.
You've gone through trauma, hospital rape. You've seen your mum, your dads and your uncles roasted alive right in front of you. Okay? And the trauma, can you imagine the trauma that child has endured for 40 years? As a community, and it's not just a community, as Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims, we should never forget the survivors. We should always take their side in terms of their narrative and never say, we shouldn't move on. We need, accountability and justice. And that's a struggle that still has to go on.
Pav, have you seen that viral TikTok recently of showing kids from the West and what they want, and showing kids from Palestine, etc., and what they want again?
Yeah.
And you see the difference. Absolutely. Where the kids in the West are saying, I just want money, or like millions, billions, money. And the other kids are saying, I want to see my brother again. I want to see my dad again. I want a piece of bread. And they dream of it and they're craving it. And I'm just thinking that puts so many things into perspective that a lot of people genuinely don't see, or they just don't get a grasp of until it's too late. And it's a shame that it has to take things like a genocide in many different places for people to actually open up and realize what's most important to them.
Yeah.
I do need to ask, was anybody ever prosecuted off the back of the 1984 genocide as a whole? Anyone to this date?
Just one Congress leader, Sajjan Kumar, has been prosecuted.
And why was he prosecuted?
So he was prosecuted for killing 4 Sikhs. But there's many crimes that he committed in terms of inciting violence and genocide that he hasn't been prosecuted for. And the reason for that, and the reason why a lot of people got away from those crimes, is that on the Indian statute books, genocide doesn't exist. Crime of genocide doesn't exist in law in India. And yet in 84, we had leaders inciting genocide. So that's the issue. So when we convict people, it's about, disharmony, religious sentiment, disrupting religious sentiment, or murder. And that's the issue.
Does that exist now?
Yeah, it doesn't exist. Not exist. That's why, there's been so few convictions. I mean, 1% conviction rate in November 1984 cases.
Wow. So it doesn't even recognize the term genocide really as an actual.
Absolutely.
Right. That explains so much as to why barely any convictions have ever taken place.
And if you peddle the idea that it was a riot, then you're saying it's not organized. And if you're saying it's not organized, there's no one to blame.
There's no accountability. That's okay. That's why they're being very intentional that you use the word riot.
And I remember looking at the first inquiry, the Misra inquiry of 1985, and his report was submitted in 1987. Misra, Raghunath Misra, actually, when he had one of the fathers whose son had been killed on the stand, told the father, no one's to blame. It's natural. We cannot blame anyone for your son's death. Can you imagine?
It's natural.
It's just natural. It happened. It was spontaneous. No one to blame. Don't blame the government. Don't blame these MPs. Don't blame the police. And he completely protected the perpetrators. And guess what? After he submitted his report, he became a supreme judge. He became the head of the Human Rights Group, Human Rights Commission in India. And lo and behold, he became a Congress MP in 1998. He served his last as well. So the judiciary has a lot to answer for covering up that genocide.
At the start, you said, although the government hasn't, the courts of Delhi have acknowledged, is it the word, use of the word genocide? Or?
Yeah. Genocide and crimes against humanity. They have acknowledged that on the back of the case against Sajjan Kumar, who was convicted.
So they've acknowledged the word genocide and it was a genocide, but case, no convictions. Yeah. Oh, only in that case,
only right? In that case, they just refer to it in the summary that in this case you can say there was a crime against humanity and there was genocide, but then thousands of other cases, nothing. Mm-hmm. But it's taken 3 decades to get to that stage. 3 decades where even a lot of the survivors' families died, never saw justice. It dragged on so long. In the first few years, the Congress protected Sajjan Kumar. Even today, the alleged perpetrators like Jagdish Titler are still protected by the Congress party. And when we've had one seat Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, Congress, he supported Jagdish Titler. He said, no, he's not involved. The former Chief Minister of Punjab, Harmandir Singh, says Titler wasn't involved. Yet we've got sworn testimony that he was there when 3 Sikhs were killed outside the gurdwara. And he was there as part of the mob. So you can see that even Sikhs of the Congress party is part of the cover-up. They have been protecting the perpetrators for the last 4 decades.
All in the pursuit of power, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. All in pursuit of their position in the Congress party. So they've never cared about the victims. They are also the problem.
When you did your research into this, sorry, go on.
So with obviously everything we're discussing here, like, it should be mandatory that people have an understanding and awareness, especially within our people, but beyond that, Pav, your impetus to dedicate yourself to the knowledge of what happened and then archive and document it and have it all well researched so we can access it easily. Why? Where did that come from?
So it came from day one. My extended family were in Delhi at the time. So on my mum's side, my Masa, Masi, and my 4 cousins were living in a place called Janakpuri. which is in West Delhi, in the constituency of Sajjan Kumar. So Sajjan Kumar was their MP.
Wow.
So I knew through firsthand, and luckily they survived. So their Hindu neighbors took them in. My cousins were actually part of there was protection committees that were created of Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims, in day 2 and day 3 to protect their colonies. They were part of that. So I knew firsthand exactly what took place, firsthand from my master, or who was involved. In 2005, I went to India and spent a year in India, and he took me around the colonies of the widows' colony, and also a place called Tilak Nagar. There's survivors there as well, and I found out firsthand exactly what took place and who was involved. So mine's quite personal. The first few hours after Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated, we were trying to ring our family in Delhi, and we'd lost touch completely. And only later on we found out, where they were. My master actually ended up in the refugee camp as well. One of my other cousins were going around with a revolver to protect himself. So, in that situation, I just, couldn't fathom, first of all, why people have turned so violently against Sikhs.
Mm.
And it's only then later I found out it didn't just happen, it was made to happen. And that's the crux of this.
That is a big distinction. It was made to happen. But it's been surrounded all these levels of, buffers now. There's a show, I don't know if you've ever watched it on National Geographic, called Nazi Hunter.
Yeah.
Where you've got people who actually try and find the actual Nazis and bring them to justice. And from a legal perspective, I see every few years, you see people not from India, so Sikhs outside of India, who have like teams and lawyers and they're trying to do things, but nothing ever seems to, like, we have a bit of momentum and then everyone gets behind it. There might be a protest and then nothing ever happens. So apart from presenting and documenting the evidence so well, is there anything else on other fronts we can do to move the agenda forward? Perhaps from a legal perspective, is there anything can be done? Or
so I think internationally is very difficult because, we've got the International Criminal Court in The Hague, but they don't take cases far back as 1984, because they were set up, I think, in the 90s. So they don't go back.
So they don't recognize it then in that sense.
Yeah, so they prosecuted mainly Yugoslavia, the Bosnia, the Srebrenica massacre, which is recognized as a genocide. 8,000 Muslim boys and Muslim men and boys were killed in Bosnia in 1992, and that's recognized as a genocide. Very similar in numbers to 1984, and that's comparable I always make. And yet the international community has recognized that because the truth came out and it was documented well. And then you can take that further. But unfortunately, we can't go back. What we can do is get the truth out, so that we can have a conversation in the West about what really took place. In this country, when it happened, a real chasm was created between Sikhs and Hindus in this country and the West. Okay? And, on the Hindu side, it was like believing the propaganda, whereas the Sikh side were getting first-hand testimony from their families. There was two narratives completely separate. And I think we need to fix that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really, passionate about evidence-led resource that people can actually read, and trying to get the two communities together to look at this objectively. Because in India, it's different. In India, we know lots of Hindus helped Sikhs, whereas in this country it isn't. It's very different. I think legally it's a problem. I think legally it's all in India, and in India we should be pushing for genocide to be recognised on the statute books. we should be talking about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like we did in South Africa to get more truth out and find out a lot more than we know now. And we should look at, a safe space for women to talk about rape, because that's still a stigma, even in our community. I think it was hidden even within our community. No, don't talk about that.
Shameful.
Shameful and so forth.
Yeah.
But obviously the extent of the burnings of particularly men and boys was such that the rape was overshadowed by that. But even still, there's still a trauma that they have to live with today.
If you're a Sikh person in Punjab, in India, do you think they live in this state of, well, we may think these things and we may want to kind of raise the alarm, but we know what the India state's like, and they might just come and silence us. And it's fine for you guys living outside of India to make all this noise and do things because, you're protected, whatever. Do you think that's part of it as well? Like raising your concerns in India now that you're still living in 40 years on, you think, well, should I?
I think India has changed. So in the first few years after November 1984, yes, there was a lot of censorship. People were put in prison. You couldn't say certain things. Things were banned. Okay. I think 40 years on, some of the truth has come out. We've managed to get people in front of judges. Okay.
Yeah.
One conviction, but hopefully we're going to get another one. The alleged NPA spoke about Jagdish Titler is going through the court cases now. Okay, so you could be number two. I also think the Indian public are much more open to the truth. So there have been a number of films without with the censorship. There's still some of the, I think a famous film came out a year or 2 years ago about the massacres.
Diljit, he did a 1984 film as well.
Yeah, something like that. So it is possible. You can do that. I think
it is possible. Yeah. But the thing is, Pav, is that he's done another film that's been so suppressed that it's not going to come out now.
Yeah. So
that's I think it's linked to the same sort of topic base.
Yeah. So that's more. That's about Jaswant Singh Kalra, who uncovered the atrocities and cremations that happened in Punjab after 1984, when he was killed for bringing the truth out. He was just a human rights activist, and that's the story. And I'm really surprised that they are attacking someone like him who was basically just trying to tell the truth. So there is that element still, but I think there is room to engage with the general Indian public.
Okay.
Remember, my book was published 4 or 5 years ago, and it was warmly received in India. I get so many messages from ordinary people of all faith, particularly Hindus, young Hindus, saying that I didn't know about this. We were told something different. We've never taught this in the class. And whenever we are, it's about a riot. It's about a spontaneous reaction to an assassination. We didn't all this detail that you put together in this book. So I think there's room to actually engage with the general population. I think that's the key to drive this forward and get it out of our community. We have for a long time kept it within the confines of our gurdwara, whereas I've always worked outside. So my campaigns, as well as documenting and writing books and creating a website, is also campaigning through my union, the National Union of Journalists. So, for the last 20 years, I've raised motions in support of the victims and telling journalists in this country the truth about what took place. And I think that's key. We should all be outside the community and telling people about this. The confining within didn't really work. You can do only so much, but are you making a difference?
That's a good point.
Very good
Pav,
point.
I've got one final question for you. What was the mental toll of this whole project like on you personally? Because I've read your website, and anytime I read into these sort of stories, it's very triggering on an emotional level. I too have a very close shave with the things that happened in '84, and as a result, they moved here to the UK. So there's a personal element that I'm sure every Sikh can definitely have that's sprinkled into this. How was that for you, and how did you manage to not numb that down, but put that to the side and be very objective with your research and the work you've done up to date?
I think before I answer that, I just want to mention the times I've gone to India, and I spent a year in India. When I talk to people in India, Sikhs in Delhi, but also in Punjab, my family's from Punjab, in a village near Moga, and our village was taken over by the army after '84. They were after a militant, and they blamed all the villages. They told people to go on the floor and kept them there for a whole day in the sun. And I've heard stories of torture and all the rest of it. But what I get a sense of, the Sikhs in Punjab, and particularly in Delhi, they know the truth, and it's simmering. When you talk to them, they will come out with, they know exactly what happened. Okay,
yeah,
it's there. Sometimes they can take it public, but it's simmering. Okay, so I've always believed actually it's worse for them than me in this country. Okay, number one. Now, obviously, there are things that I've read. I mean, I had to read 500 affidavits when I was creating the website, so I can put together the stories and make them accessible. 500 affidavits, and there are real horror stories in those affidavits. Yeah. There are some of the affidavits that have never come to light, which I'm going to share in the next few days. There are some incidents that will shock you in the way the way killings that happened that haven't come out yet. I've uncovered particularly three affidavits. Which I'm getting to verify, but they are sworn affidavits. And two of them talk about, in one area outside Delhi, they talk about a makeshift oven where they were taking Sikhs and roasting them alive. That sounds shocking. Hell. And there was two affidavits from two widows. One other affidavit talked about a tandoor where they were putting Sikhs' heads into the tandoor and burning them. So these stories no one knows about, and it's only when I uncovered these by reading 500 that I can share these. Obviously, they will impact. I mean, I try to manage my mental health. I mean, I do that through sport. It always helps me. Sport. I'm a triathlete, so I do triathlons. I'm big on swimming, cycling, and running. And sometimes I've read an affidavit. I go out and run, or I'll go on my bike. So I'm very active. I think that's the way I've managed, to be sane. But I always back of my mind, always remember you haven't forgotten the victims. You don't forget them, because they're going through a much worse trauma. They saw the horror in front of their eyes. They've lost loved ones. I was lucky, my family survived. They have actually lost, and they keep on losing to drugs, to alcohol, and so many other ills, not having money coming in, jobs, all the rest of it. And then also the fear that this could happen again. They're reminded by people in India, we're going to do it again. Churasi. Don't forget Churasi. We can do it again. And you saw that during the farmers' protests, when some right-wing groups would say that to Sikhs, keep in your place, because, what we did in '84, we can do it again. And it has been done to other communities in India. We know that. 2002 against Muslims in Gujarat. There's a blueprint. The blueprint of '84 has been repeated because the lessons weren't learned. The guilty perpetrators were given immunity from prosecution.
Yeah.
What does that say to other killers? Oh, we can get away with murder. What does that say to the police? They're untouchable. So until we learn the lesson of 84, these things will happen again and again for future generations. And I don't want to see that happening again. That's why it's so important that we need to get this out, particularly to the Indian public. Say to them, these leaders of yours, they have none of your interests at heart. They are power hungry. They will kill to stay in power. Okay? Whatever faith they are, they'll do whatever it takes. So, it's so important to learn these lessons.
Agreed. Pav, just want to say a big thank you for this week's episode and giving us a pretty straightforward educational lesson. This is probably the best synopsis I've heard and in-depth breakdown as to what happened, why it happened, how it happened, etc. So thank you for your time. Where can people find out more about everything, including your book, best place to buy, etc.?
Okay, so my book, we've actually sold out in the UK, but the ebook is available, so you can get the ebook from Kashi House, who's my publisher. But if you're in India, Rupa Publications, you can get the book in print and ebook. And I'm hoping that the Punjabi and Hindi version will be coming out soon as well, if it hasn't already. So hopefully more people will be able to read it in their own language. And obviously the website is now live, so that is free, available, free of ads. It's not a commercial venture. It is purely educational. Educational resource for everyone to look at, research, and do more research. Look more into it. Make documentaries, make films. Take this further. But my wish was always to make this freely available to everyone.
Thank you, Pav. And is the book going to come to the UK anytime soon? I'd love to read it.
So the book is already published in here already. You can get the ebook.
It's sold out,
as you said.
But it's sold out. Yeah, we may do a reprint, but you can get the ebook in any case.
Okay.
But pretty much all the evidence that I used in the book is in the website now. Yeah.
Perfect. Karen, anything to add?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, guys. I think that's it's really good to disseminate all this quite complex set of episodes. But yeah, thank you.
It is very complex, and as Indy said, Pav, because you've done all 500 affidavits. When you said that, I was trying to comprehend. Like my brain would go to reading 500 journals or 500 medical papers and then critiquing them and then distilling them down. And those two very specific methods of killing. It's sometimes when something is so horrific, like when I went to Sachsenhausen and they showed me exactly how they designed the death camps and the rooms, and they had this one thing that always sticks in my head, which is like the person went in and they were told that they're measuring their height, but behind them, the height measurement, there was a hole, and then the gun would come through there and bang, and it was done in the most efficient method. And one thing that happens when things are so horrific, we then ignore the detail. But because you've gone down, there is, like you said, do more research. I love how you said do more research. It's probably much more defined. But the phrase that will stick in my head, this didn't just happen, this was made to happen. That's very powerful.
That will stay with me.
That will stay with me. The way you framed that that says it all. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your seva. Keep doing more. And I hope, are you going to be doing any sort of live tours? Do you do any talks or anything around this?
Yeah, so we're launching this. If this is out on the 31st of October, we are launching this from the University of London, School of Oriental and African Studies, with a panel of experts, academics, journalists who were there at the time. So hopefully that's gone successful. We are also having an event on the 6th of November at the Wiener Holocaust Library, where I'm one of the community advocates. So I'll be talking about the events with DJ Bobby Friction.
Okay.
So that will be on the 6th of November. So yeah, And then obviously there'll be more events going forward.
Going forward.
And how can people get tickets to it? Is it an open ticketed event?
So the 6th of November, I think they're going to go on. It's already sold out. So it's sold out within a matter of days. People really, I think because of the 40th anniversary, really want to be a part of it. But there'll be an online video of it as well. That we, I think, live, so that'll be shared at the time.
Sounds great. Thanks, Pav. People, we will see you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you guys for watching. Check out the rest of our episodes here, and don't forget to subscribe here. We'll see you guys on the next one.